Now's the perfect time to pursue your master's degree at Ohio Dominican University.
My master's degree in healthcare administration fit in perfectly with my full-time work schedule. I was able to advance my career, and the content applied directly into my day-to-day working experiences.
ODU's graduate programs in business, healthcare administration, and education can be completed 100% online or on campus. Apply now at ohiodominican.edu/grad.
Hello and welcome to another of our Panther Podcast Weeklies. This is Todd Bell. This week it's a special show as we're going to be visiting with the commissioner of the Great Midwest Athletic Conference. Now, a reminder that you can catch all of our past episodes of Panther Podcast Weekly by going to YouTube, search and subscribe to ODU Athletics, and you can get updates on the latest podcast released by following us on social media, both on Twitter and on Facebook at ODU Athletics. Back in 2011, Tom Daeger was named the first commissioner of the Great Midwest Athletic Conference. He's guided the league through development as a new athletic league in what is now the sixth largest Division II conference. Daeger has aided the Great Midwest's efforts as a leader in promotion of student-athlete welfare and success with dedication to private nonprofit institutions in the Midwest. With 20 years of athletic conference administration experience, Tom has also served on a number of national committees. And back on August 10th, the Great Midwest Athletic Conference President's Councils postponed the fall championship segments of football, men's soccer, women's soccer, and volleyball. Now, the conference schedule and championships in each of those high-contact risk sports, as defined by the NCAA's resocialization of collegiate sports guidelines, are moved to the spring. The Great Midwest is maintaining the cross-country championship segment of the fall as originally scheduled. Additionally, engagement in all sports, including golf, tennis competitions, are going to be permitted in the fall by institutions that are able to meet the NCAA national and local health and safety guidelines. It's my pleasure at this time to bring in the Commissioner of the Great Midwest, Tom Daeger. And Tom, first and foremost, how are you and all of your staff keeping everything together? How's everything going right now? How's morale there in the offices of the Great Midwest Athletic Conference?
Hello, Todd, and thanks again for having me this afternoon. The morale is certainly high considering the circumstances that we're working through at this point, Todd. And as I know and you can imagine, all collegiate sports are challenged currently with the pandemic issues that have been created and our focus on trying to ensure that we are supporting our student athletes in this difficult space. But our staff is doing well considering and certainly looking forward to continuing ways to have a terrific 2020-21 academic year with our student athletes and our member institutions.
Tom, one of the main reasons why I wanted to visit with you here today is to try and inform our viewers as much as possible, to kind of reveal some of the behind-the-scenes discussions, what you can reveal, that has led to not only where the GMAC, but all Division II, Division III, and Division I schools at the NCAA level are kind of headed. I know extensive meetings with athletic directors, university presidents. Can you kind of give us a synopsis, even going back to last spring when everything got canceled, of just kind of maybe your role as conference commissioner with the ADs and presidents and the like?
Certainly, we've been fortunate to have tremendous engagement by the President's Council throughout this process, dating back to the decisions that were made this past spring. Ultimately, the decision rests with the presidents. Both as decisions are made at the conference level and as they continue to support their campus communities locally with their institutional decisions. With that said, the athletic directors and a number of committees throughout the membership, conference membership that is, featuring representatives from the faculty athletic, representative group, the senior women administrators, our athletic trainers, and other administrators throughout our respective membership have been meeting frequently since early spring as we continue to evaluate the environment and the challenges the pandemic is creating. They've been making recommendations then to the President's Council for consideration and have been working tirelessly to provide, again, the experiences that we hope to have for our student athletes this coming fall, winter, and spring. In the spring, the decisions really followed to an extent the national decisions by NCAA Division II to cancel the spring championships. And at that point, we were still battling, as we are to an extent now, a lot of the unknowns around the pandemic. And the President's Council met frequently to determine that at that particular time, Todd, it was in our best interest to cease our competitions, our conference championships, and our conference schedule, which ultimately at the conference level is what we can control. As we move through the summer, we and our institution still have a strong desire to engage our student athletes and provide them the experiences that they've come to expect as members of the Great Midwest and our terrific league members. And at the initial start, or at the initial decision-making timeline relative to whether or not we could continue on in the fall, considering all of the variables around us, a decision was made to push initially the fall competition, the fall champion segments, the ones that you referenced earlier: football, men's and women's soccer, cross country, and women's volleyball, back 3 weeks to allow for a number of things to occur, including the opportunity for our institutions to continue to bring students back and to orient them to new processes on campuses and ensure that they're following along with what every other member of the student body was expected to do at that particular moment in time, as they many of them staggered their return to campus. On August 5th, a decision was made by the NCAA Board of Governors to mandate a significant portion of the resocialization of sport guidelines that they had previously introduced as guidelines. And in those mandates, there was a significant testing portion that frankly was not something that was going to be anything that our conference institutions would be able to logistically or financially meet for fall competitions in football, men's and women's soccer, and volleyball, the high contact sports that you referenced earlier in the introduction. For those reasons, a decision was made by the President's Council for the sake of the seasons that we have for fall, to push those to the spring and ensure that we are providing a meaningful opportunity for those sports in the spring. This also obviously following the decision by the NCAA Division II President's Council to cancel fall championships. With the cancellation of fall championships and the opportunity to continue to identify logistical and other needs for our sports, we felt the spring was the best place to conduct those. With that being said, we also are adamant and very supportive of what our institutions are doing as it relates to their plans for their student athletes, their student bodies, as they're returning them to campus. And thus, we as a conference have made the decision to postpone the conference championships and the conference schedule in those sports, but are leaving at the institutional level, as we feel is important, the opportunity for our members to engage the student athletes in practice and out-of-season activities and even a non-championship segment for other sports, if in fact they are able to move forward safely and effectively with their plans for all students as they bring them back to campus. The practice piece was very important for us in fall, and we feel confident that the institutions are going to move forward in the appropriate way to, again, engage the student athletes and ensure their experience on campus is a positive one.
I think it's been interesting in talking with our athletic director at Ohio Dominican, Jeff Blair. There's just so many questions that have to be answered, and it's understanding the new calendar or understanding what can and cannot be done. So this has been a very challenging time for everybody, as you kind of walked us through that, to be able to institute some of these new practices.
It is, and to the credit of the national office and the staff and the work that not only the national office is conducting, but as all these decisions are made by the NCAA, they're driven by the membership and the representatives of our respective Division I, II, and III institutions on those committees, and specifically to the Division II actions The administrative committee at the national office has been working continuously since the middle of spring to make decisions on eligibility, on, to your point, Todd, the steps necessary to identify what's permissible in accountable athletic related activities, and still to ensure that we are protecting the best interests of the student athletes. The Division II National Student Athlete Advisory Committee has been very engaged in providing feedback along this process to ensure that the administrators are hearing from the students and gathering their concerns before any of these decisions are made, that, to be quite frank, are well outside any legislative process due to the importance and the timeliness of the decisions. Typically, any legislation change, Todd, as you're probably aware, in the NCAA takes some time, and unfortunately sometimes gathers negative media because of the timeliness in the process. They have been very responsive to the importance of meeting these decisions quickly. And to some end, we don't have information quickly enough. And that's the case in not only athletics right now, but any other organization that's trying to battle COVID-19 challenges. And we are working in our compliance office, and our senior associate commissioner, Leslie Schumann, is doing a great job in working with our institutional compliance officers to identify what is still permissible so that we can still offer and promote that we are in Division II, an association that values and treasures the balance of the student athlete experience. It would be very easy for us administratively and as administrators to implement continuous engagement with our student athletes above the hours that we feel are so important to reduce in the non-championship and out of season context, to allow that balance. With all of that being said, we are also hearing from the student athletes how important it is for them to still be engaged with their teammates, to still have that connection with their coaches. And quite frankly, one of our bigger concerns in the conference office, and you highlighted it kindly by even asking us how we were doing, the mental health position of all of our student athletes is something that we're really looking closely at. And we've engaged with some third-party partners to provide some online opportunities for student athletes to remain engaged as they start this new academic year. But as we have been dealing in the spring with online learning and now moving back into this new environment of education and what we're dealing with from a social distance standpoint, having that mental health piece attached to what we're trying to provide our members and providing those resources is very important for us. So you're correct. And again, hats off to your administrators, President Gervasi, Jeff, Sandy, the entire team there at Ohio Dominican is staying very much at the forefront of what's permissible and what we are also trying to do to ensure we're protecting our student athletes, not only from COVID-19, but also to ensure that they still have a safe and healthy experience at Ohio Dominican.
Tom, I think one of the things I wanted to let our viewers know is you were a very talented baseball player at the Division II level at the University of Indianapolis. So you, as well as anybody, knows the sensitivity and what role athletics plays in a student athlete's life, knowing that you're probably not going to make it to that professional level, but this is going to take you into a different path. You've been very sensitive from a personal experience. Maybe you didn't have the rug pulled from out under you and have maybe a senior season taken away, but you know what these student athletes are kind of going through right now.
Correct. And you're far too kind to my baseball skills back in the day. But I will say this as a former student athlete, and as we were making the decision specifically in the spring to a sport to which I have a fondness and obviously experience as a student athlete, as you mentioned, with baseball season being canceled, is for all of those spring student athletes and those winter student athletes and now fall student athletes that did not have the opportunity to compete for a conference and or national championship. I can't imagine what those current student athletes were experiencing at the time, and therefore, to your point, we understood the significance and understand the significance of the decisions that we're making. And the last thing that we want to do is to affect their opportunities to compete for championships and enjoy what we as former student athletes had the opportunity to enjoy as a season or a athletic career culminated. So with that, certainly, as you've seen, the administrative committee has tried to provide some flexibility on season of competition waiver opportunities and try to extend those additional years. But we also understand that not everyone is willing or interested in taking advantage of that. And I confess that if put in that position when I was a senior student athlete in my final year of competition, I was on a medical redshirt year as a fifth-year student athlete. I think it would have been a very difficult decision for me to have to make as it relates to whether to return or to move forward professionally. And we sympathize with those decisions that have to be made. We understand, but we also have been trying, I think, from a national perspective, and certainly our institutions are trying to support our student athletes in whatever way possible. And again, a feel for anyone that's placed in that position. These are not easy times, and certainly not decisions we ever thought we'd be faced with, and as administrators or certainly as coaches or student athletes.
I've been very fortunate to be a part of this program at Ohio Dominican since it went to Division II back in 2010, and know that specifically with the move from the GLIAC to the Great Midwest, it was a move to get among other institutions that were very much alike, small private institutions. With that said, very difficult times financially already for a lot of those institutions before what happened last year. So looking at the decisions made for a lot of institutions like Ohio Dominican across the country, Tom, was there a couple of things, sticking points when it comes to obstacles that just could not be overcome to try and play sports last spring, now this fall, and even what we're looking to the winter or even next spring? I think everybody just says testing and the money for that. But were there a couple of just sticking points that you guys just looked at each other and went, we can't overcome this obstacle, we must postpone or cancel?
Well, specifically to last spring, we were in a much different position, I think, relative to what we knew at the time. And I think the decision was out of significant precaution and necessity based on where we were societally and what we knew from medical professionals and those that we were seeking guidance from. As this, to your point, as we move forward logistically, and I think both from an ethical, logistical, and financial position, the obstacles are surrounding around what has been established as the testing requirements and the type of tests that are prescribed and mandated at this particular time. And I think the focus and as we continue forward is, you mentioned our like-mindedness as institutions. Our goal is to provide our institutions the opportunity to engage with their local and state health professionals and ensure that they are meeting their local guidelines first and foremost as they move forward. That is as we're spread across 5 states, the most important piece for us. If we were all in one state and managing one guideline, it'd be a little different. But the importance of our institutions to be able to focus on that piece, and then to the extent to which the mandates have impacted our decisions, I think as you've seen clearly across the entire Division II, Division III, and to a large extent the Division I landscape, the availability and the opportunity to engage alternative testing methods has not been something that's readily available for our institutions to push through and ensure that we are taking the necessary steps to have championships this fall. With the additional decision that the NCAA fall championships have been canceled, it does provide the opportunity for us to look at a more opportunistic experience for our student athletes in the fall championship sports after the January 1 date, as we continue forward and as we have over the last 4 months, continue to see evolution in how this virus is being handled across the respective regions. Our conference made the decision a little bit later than some of the other conferences, but we also felt that our plans locally and at the state level were very, very sound as we continue to return our student athletes to campus. And I still feel our institutions are of that opinion at this time, Tom.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because one of the questions I had for you was, what role did it play in the conference's decision-making that you're spread out over a number of states, 5 or 6 states, depending on if you include the affiliated members as well? That couldn't have made things any easier, I'm sure.
It doesn't, but again, I think to your point, Todd, our institutions are so cohesive as it relates to how they're approaching from their mission, from what they value, and to be quite frank, the position that the conference should provide guidance. And our focus at this point is to identify where the championship and the conference schedule should land. And we want to provide our institutions the autonomy to best serve their student athletes, and therefore allow them, the ability to determine if their plans are sound, that they can move forward accordingly. And certainly as we enter into high contact sport competition, we've worked on developing visiting team protocols and other measures that will be important for us as we take those steps. But as that time was available and we were able to ensure that we had a better opportunity to provide for our student athletes the experience they needed in the spring, the decision was made. And I think our President's Council are certainly going to continue to meet over the coming months as we continue to evaluate the best way to structure those for those fall student athletes, with the important caveat that we are also not impacting the experience that spring student athletes are going to have, or the winter sports student athletes are going to have, noting that we are condensing to some degree, or significant degree, the time frame in which we're going to conduct an entire academic year of championships and conference competition.
Well, that'll kind of lead me down the path. Another path I wanted to discuss is we've heard about the fall sports and how they have been affected and how it might affect things come spring. I'm sure there's been a lot of dialogue about how that may or may not look and how it may or may not work by adding that element of moving 4 or 5 fall sports into the spring.
We are. It's actually just concluded a meeting this morning as we continue to ensure that we are taking the best steps forward to logistically provide the most positive experience for everyone involved, and certainly with sensitivity to the schedules that were already in place. And we are confident that we will have a plan. We are confident we have a plan, and that we will be able to roll out soon information on a structure that will benefit all of our institutions and student athletes, and still provide, to some degree, flexibility in their championship segments outside of the conference schedule, based on how each of our institutions want to move forward with their fall championship segments in the spring. And I think that varies based on desired number of competitions and some other factors that will come into play relative to NCAA legislation and relief that has been provided. So we are working through those now to ensure that we can provide to our student athletes a layout that will prove to be successful as we step into the spring seasons.
Tom, a lot of discussion about fall and spring, but how about our winter discussions right now? So many conferences at the Division II level, or even Division III, kind of put the brakes on everything and put a January 1 target date as to when things would resume. Obviously, the basketball season, the preseason starts in October. The games start being played in November. What can you reveal about initial talks about what the GMAC basketball season might look like this year?
As with our other out-of-season sports and all of our winter sports, at this point, our institutions are very much moving forward with their intentions to meet local and state recommendations on health and safety, but also, again, provide them those practice and out-of-season workout opportunities to engage them. So for us, the out-of-season basketball schedule right now is as would normally be once our student athletes return to campus, with the caveat that the institutions are putting in the required necessities for health and safety purposes. And therefore, our conference and our institutions have a schedule in place, which is a conference-only schedule for men's and women's basketball that will begin in November and stay on the current championship segment schedule. With that being said, we're going to continue to evaluate how things continue to evolve in this space over the next 4 to 6 weeks. And as we get to the mid to end of September, ensure that we are comfortable that we're still in the correct space for that sport as we move forward into their official practices or official competitions this fall. As you noted, a number of conferences have moved their basketball season to January, where the current winter basketball championships for the NCAA are located. A schedule after January provides, to some degree, a bit of a truncated opportunity for engaging in competition. And we'd like to very much maximize the championship segment if available to us. And therefore, we'll evaluate that over the next few weeks and ensure that we're moving forward in the appropriate direction with our basketball seasons. The possibilities, and as we've noted, the NCAA decision makers, the administrative committee, the president's council are continuing to evaluate what championships look like across the entirety of the division over these next few months as well, and with I think a strong focus on ensuring that we are conducting our winter and spring championships if they can be conducted safely. But we'll be evaluating all necessary adjustments if there are in fact adjustments that we have to proceed with. Again, our hope, and we are certainly starting to see some of this develop, is things change every day as it relates to local and state guidelines. Clearly, the governor of Ohio came out yesterday with some additional announcements today as well. So things change weekly, and we're going to stay on top of those and make sure we make the right decision at the right time. And for us, the right time to make any additional decision on winter sports is not yet. We want to give it every opportunity to provide the most extensive experience for our student athletes as possible.
When we started our video podcast segments back in early summer, late spring, and the first one was with our athletic director, Jeff Blair, and I remember saying to him, there was no handbook left for you on how to handle these types of situations. That's obviously the same for a conference commissioner. But mentioned earlier, you've served on national committees and a lengthy experience in this role. I imagine you've had some peers or some other mentors that you've probably leaned on here a little bit through this process to help everybody kind of guide their way through this.
There certainly is no handbook, Todd, as you mentioned. And first, I'd like to acknowledge the work that our administrators have done, and they're meeting regularly to provide feedback, to engage with each other, to provide support, and quite frankly, guidance and continued fellowship as we've moved forward through these challenging decisions. And the opportunity to connect with those peers is very important for us. And similarly at the conference level, it's been the same in my position, and I'm very fortunate to have 22 other Division II commissioners that are really constantly available and willing to share ideas and continue to communicate to, again, ensure that we are doing our very best to promote and support our student athletes in this space. And the D2 Conference Commissioners Association meets regularly and has been meeting regularly since this spring. And I've been fortunate again to have those resources as we've been working through these decisions. But as you've seen at all levels, the decisions certainly do rest with each particular conference, and our first and foremost responsibility is to our member institutions. And therefore, as I led with, our President's Council are the decision makers and the ones that will be ultimately making the best decisions for the Great Midwest. My job and our job as administrators is to ensure that we give them the best information possible and the most researched guidance and recommendations that we can, so that we land in the right place and provide them the support to make these very difficult decisions. But to answer your question succinctly, yes, the group that we have with the commissioners has been outstanding, and I actually have a call with them as I follow up with you here this afternoon to continue our conversations.
Tom, lastly, keeping the student athlete in mind, people may have heard the term SAC, but maybe don't know what it is. It's Student Athlete Advisory Committee. The current SAC committee is headed up by Wiley Kane, who is a quarterback at Kentucky Wesleyan University. I know he's very involved. I know our student athletes who are involved in SAC here, we have our own branch, and then we have our own president that meets with everybody else within the conference. How much of a voice have the student athletes have, or I guess how much of a voice have you heard from the student athletes and that advisory committee throughout all this process?
Wiley's done a tremendous job in representing us, and to Wiley's credit, he stepped into this role believe maybe a month before the spring sports were canceled, and has really had to jump in nationally to represent us, and conducted a couple of SAC meetings with our conference SAC representatives, and at least two of our SAC representatives from each of our respective institutions were joined on a call. And to be honest, Todd, it hasn't just been the COVID-19 issues that they've been addressing. It's the social justice issues that have been at the forefront of public support and certainly attention. And that group has been very helpful in providing and guiding opinion on the decisions that have been made. And we certainly hope and trust that our administrators are working with their SAC advisors and SAC presidents to gather as much information as they can. And I think, as we have seen through all of this, and our ability as a society to adapt is the means by which we're communicating in the Zoom meetings and the Google Meets and the number of different avenues that our student athletes are, to be quite frank, well ahead of the curve on us already, has, I think, provided them the opportunity to stay engaged and continue to provide that feedback to coaches and others, so that we are well attuned to what their thoughts are in some of these areas. So yes, Wiley's done a tremendous job in his new role as division, as the Great Midwest SAC president, and certainly representing us in the larger room. And as I mentioned previously, the national SAC has had a significant impact on how some of the EdCom decisions have landed on a number of different issues, and that's an important piece, as those are the individuals that we serve.
Tom, it's been great to have you on here. I hope that you've been able to answer some questions that our viewers may have had, and just the whole process of how all of this works. There's so many moving parts behind the scenes. There's so much that we read on social media, positive, negative, no matter what the level is. And you see some Division I football teams playing. Well, how come we can't play? Well, hopefully we've answered some of those questions. And more importantly, hopefully the next time you and I are doing something like this, it's at halftime of a game or at a championship of some sort, where we can talk about what's actually happening on the field.
I hope so too, Todd. And again, appreciate all the work that you do for Ohio Dominican and the conference, and appreciate the opportunity to join you today.
That is Tom Daeger, the Great Midwest Athletic Conference Commissioner, as we wrap up another edition of Panther Podcast Weekly. Folks, remember, you can view our past episodes as we had our department tours over the summer. Go to youtube.com and search for Ohio Dominican Athletics. And for the latest release dates and other information, follow at ODU Athletics on social media. My thanks again to Tom Daeger, the Commissioner of the Great Midwest Athletic Conference, for being a part of this week's show. This is Todd Bell. Thanks so much for watching. And remember, it's always a great day to be a Panther.